France, spring 1944. The sky above the Loire River was burning. A single P-51 Mustang tore through the clouds, silver wings flashing in the sun, its Merlin engine screaming at full throttle. Behind it, 12 black crosses dove from the light. A full Luftwaffe Squadron of F-190s and Bf-109s closing fast. The radio crackled with static and fear. "You've got the whole Luftwaffe on your tail, Bill. Break off!" No answer. Lieutenant William R. Wild Bill, Overstreet Jr., pulled the stick hard and dropped into a dive so steep his altimeter spun like a compass gone mad. The airframe groaned, rivets trembling. His oxygen mask filled with the sound of his own breath, quick, sharp, calm. He'd been outnumbered before, but never like this. The German formation fanned out, trying to box him in. Tracers arced past his canopy, bright orange lines cutting through blue. One shell hit his right wingtip, a burst of flame, then smoke. He killed the fire with a snap roll, then dove lower, hugging the river valley. "Come on, sweetheart," he whispered to the plane. "One more dance." Below, the town of Tours flashed by in seconds. Civilians looked up to see a duel etched across the sky. One silver streak against a dozen black shapes. The lead German ace dove after him, determined to finish it. Overstreet pushed the throttle forward, diving so low that the river spray misted across his cockpit glass. Ahead loomed a stone bridge, massive and unmoving. He should have pulled up. He didn't. The Mustang roared under the arch at nearly 400 miles per hour. The German followed, too fast, too low. Overstreet fired his .50 calibers, the tracers ripping through the bridge's shadow. The Bf-109 erupted in flame and smashed into the river. The town fell silent, just the echo of thunder and wings. Above the bridge, Overstreet's Mustang pulled back into the sky, smoke trailing from her wing but still climbing, still fighting. The radio finally came alive. "Jesus, Bill, you're insane." He grinned under his mask. "Yeah," he said. "But they're running out of pilots." For decades, people believed air battles in World War II were decided by numbers, that victory belonged to the squadrons, not the men inside them. They imagined hundreds of planes moving in perfect formation, chess pieces directed by unseen strategists. But by 1944, that illusion had burned away over the skies of Europe. Dogfights weren't neat, they were chaos, smoke, sun, and instinct. Once the first burst of fire cut through the air, formations collapsed, radios went silent, and every pilot was alone. In theory, the Allies held the advantage. More aircraft, more fuel, more production. But in practice, the Luftwaffe still ruled the heart of the continent. They knew every valley, every river, every blind turn of the French sky. That day, William Overstreet wasn't supposed to be a hero. He was just another escort pilot guarding B-17 bombers returning from a raid. His orders were simple: protect the heavies, don't chase. But when a formation of Focke-Wulfs cut through the clouds, the bombers scattered, and the sky dissolved into madness. Overstreet's squadron split apart in seconds. His wingman vanished into cloud cover, hit by flak. Overstreet dived after one of the German leaders, a bright yellow-nosed Bf-109 weaving low through the Loire Valley. In that instant, the mission changed. It wasn't about escort duty anymore. It was about survival, instinct, and a duel written in adrenaline. Historians later called it reckless, but pilots knew better. Reckless was a word for people on the ground. In the air, hesitation killed faster than bullets. Overstreet's Mustang wasn't the fastest aircraft that day. The German fighters had the advantage of altitude and numbers. What they didn't have was nerve. He once said in an interview decades later, "If you think too long up there, you're already dead. The plane reacts faster than your fear." That philosophy, half courage, half surrender to the machine, made men like him unpredictable. And unpredictability, not formation flying, won battles. In the chaos of the European air war, one man and one aircraft could tilt the balance, not because they were stronger, but because they refused to play by the math. Overstreet's flight that day would prove it. He would face the entire Luftwaffe Squadron alone, and somehow live to tell the tale. Before the legend, there was the machine. The North American P-51 Mustang, sleek, silver, and deadly, was not born a killer. It was engineered to be one. Its laminar flow wings sliced through the air with less drag than anything else in the sky. Its Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine gave it claws at high altitude, 1,600 horsepower of liquid-cooled precision that could carry it higher and faster than any German fighter in 1944. The Mustang's cockpit sat high and wide, giving the pilot a near panoramic view. You could see death coming, one pilot said, and smile right back at it. When fully loaded with twin-drop tanks, the Mustang could fly over 1,600 miles, enough to escort bombers deep into Germany and back. It was the first American fighter that could follow the B-17s all the way home, and it changed the war overnight. But the machine's perfection came with a cost. The P-51 demanded aggression. It punished hesitation. Pilots who treated it gently never returned. "She's like a thoroughbred," Overstreet once told his mechanic. "If you don't ride her like she wants, she throws you off." The German fighters he faced, the Focke-Wulf 190A8 and Messerschmitt 109G6, were masterpieces of their own. Shorter wings, faster climb, deadlier cannons. In a straight fight, they could kill a Mustang in seconds, but they couldn't match its endurance. The Luftwaffe could fight for minutes. The Mustang could fight for hours. By 1944, that difference, stamina versus burst, defined the European air war. The Germans fought over their homeland. The Americans fought across an ocean. Overstreet flew with the 357th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Oxford Boys. They were a breed apart, young, confident, reckless. Their kill ratios were staggering, but so were their losses. Most didn't survive 6 missions. The group's unofficial motto said everything: "You can't win from behind." Their commander demanded 2 things: speed and initiative. No one embodied both like Wild Bill Overstreet. He was a quiet Virginian who'd learned to fly crop dusters before the war. Calm on the ground, electric in the air. Fellow pilots said he didn't fly the Mustang. He wore it like a second skin. That combination of man and machine would meet its trial over France, in the moment when tactics, theory, and reason all failed. Because no design, no training, and no command could predict what he was about to do next. In war, the sky has its own arithmetic, a brutal kind where one mistake equals death, and numbers are written in smoke. By early 1944, the Luftwaffe was bleeding. Allied factories were producing 7 new fighters for every one Germany could replace, yet the air over Europe was still dangerous. The Germans had lost their control of altitude, but not their accuracy. A veteran pilot in a Bf-109 or FW-190 could kill in seconds. Every statistic said the same thing: no one flew alone and lived long. But William Overstreet never cared much for statistics. A P-51 Mustang carried 1,880 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, enough for roughly 45 seconds of sustained fire. That was all. A minute of trigger time separated a living ace from a smoking wreck. Each burst lasted less than 2 seconds. Each second had to count. Fuel was another form of death. With external tanks, a Mustang could fly 6 hours. But in combat, every burst of throttle burned a gallon in 10 seconds. Dogfighting meant empty tanks before the map ran out. Then came the odds. That day, over the Loire Valley, Overstreet faced 12 enemy aircraft. 12 against 1, not in formation but hunting. Each Focke-Wulf carried twin 20mm cannons and a 13mm machine gun. One hit could shred a wing. 2 could vaporize the cockpit. By the book, the chance of survival was under 5%. On paper, the math was impossible. But the sky isn't paper. The P-51's Merlin engine could climb at 3,200 feet per minute. Its roll rate was faster than the FW-190 at high speeds. Its laminar flow wing created less drag, allowing it to maintain energy through steep dives. And in the hands of a pilot who didn't know how to quit, the Mustang became something alive, part machine, part instinct. Overstreet had flown 53 missions by then. He'd lost friends on half of them. He knew what the numbers meant. But he also knew what they didn't, that courage couldn't be graphed, and luck couldn't be engineered. So when the German squadron turned toward him, when tracers began to arc through the sky, he didn't think about odds or math. He only thought about angles, speed, and gravity. The three laws of survival that no statistic could touch. And when he dove toward the bridge that day, the numbers finally failed, and history began. The Loire Valley shimmered in morning haze. Far below, fields rippled like silver silk as the sound of engines rolled across the river. A lone P-51 Mustang flashed in the sunlight, its wings streaked with soot, and its guns already half empty. Behind it came the roar of vengeance, 12 black crosses cutting through the air, closing fast. Overstreet had been separated from his formation minutes earlier. He could have turned west, climbed toward the channel, and lived. Instead, he pulled into a shallow climb, baiting them lower. "Come on, you bastards," he muttered. "Let's finish it." The German leader, a decorated ace in a yellow-nosed Bf-109, took the challenge. He peeled away from his formation and dove, confident that gravity was on his side. The others followed, engines screaming, wings quivering. Overstreet dropped his external tanks and shoved the throttle forward until the Merlin engine howled. The Mustang's nose plunged, following the curve of the river. Houses and trees blurred beneath him. The altimeter spun down past 1,000 feet, then 500. The airframe groaned, rivets singing like insects. Tracer fire hissed past the cockpit. One round punched through the tail. Overstreet jerked the stick, skimming so low that his wingtips kissed the mist rising from the water. He didn't look back. He was watching the bridge ahead, an old stone arch at Tours, its twin pillars framing the river like a gate. The German in pursuit saw it too. It was suicide to fly under it. The gap was barely 30 feet high. Overstreet didn't blink. At 400 miles an hour, he aimed straight for the opening. The roar of the river swallowed every sound. The Mustang shot beneath the arch, its canopy clearing stone by inches. For one impossible second, sunlight vanished. Then he burst through to the other side, rolling inverted to avoid the reflection of his own wake. The German pilot hesitated, then followed. Pride and rage left no room for logic. He dove under the bridge, a fraction too low. Overstreet squeezed the trigger. 650 caliber Brownings erupted, the tracers stitching through the archway. The Bf-109 exploded in a sphere of fire that lit the water orange. The townspeople watching from the riverbank screamed, some in terror, some in awe. They saw two shapes vanish beneath the bridge, one engulfed in flame, the other climbing back toward the clouds. Behind him, the rest of the Luftwaffe formation broke apart, confusion replacing confidence. Anti-aircraft crews on the ground froze. No one dared fire for fear of hitting their own. Overstreet's radio crackled with voices. "Jesus, Bill, where the hell are you?" "Still flying," he answered, breath ragged. "Still fighting." His ammunition was nearly gone. His right wing bled smoke, but the Merlin engines sang, smooth, defiant, alive. He climbed into the clouds, leaving behind a bridge that would become a monument. That morning, the war briefly paused. Not in treaties or orders, but in the impossible sight of a Mustang flying under stone and coming out whole. The bridge was behind him now, but the sky still hunted. When Overstreet burst back into the light, half the Luftwaffe formation was diving to cut him off. Two Focke-Wulfs came down from his left, their cannons flashing. Another pair looped behind, closing the trap. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and nearly out of ammunition. Every calculation said this was where his story ended. But the Mustang's Merlin engine had one more miracle left. Overstreet yanked the throttle wide open, banking hard into a climb. At 390 miles per hour, he pulled 3.5 Gs, the blood draining from his vision, the airframe groaning in protest. The FW-190s followed, but their radial engines struggled to match the climb rate. He flipped the Mustang over in a half-roll, dropped the nose, and came down behind them. 2-second burst. One Focke-Wulf shattered. Another spiraled away, trailing black smoke. His ammo counter hit 0. Only silence remained in his guns. He should have run, but instinct refused. He pulled into the clouds, vanishing like a ghost. German pilots scanned the haze, expecting him to dive away. Instead, he climbed higher. The Mustang wasn't built for comfort at that altitude. Icing began on the canopy. Fuel gauges flickered near empty. Still he climbed. The oxygen mask hissed with each breath, the world shrinking to heartbeat, engine, and gravity. Below him, the German fighters broke formation, burning fuel they couldn't spare. One by one, they peeled away, their wings disappearing into cloud. When Overstreet leveled off, he was alone, the sky silent again. Later, engineers studying his flight data would discover what he'd done should have broken the plane apart. He had exceeded the Mustang's structural stress limit by 12%. The wings bent, the spars cracked, but the machine held together, barely. Luck, physics, and madness had found equilibrium. Overstreet turned west, his last gallon of fuel evaporating in vapor trails. Behind him, France slept again under clouds that still smelled of gunpowder and courage. He'd gone to war against an entire squadron, and somehow the sky had let him go. For 20 minutes, the radios of the 357th Fighter Group were filled with static. Overstreet's call sign had vanished from the map, his transponder dead. The pilots assumed the worst. "Wild Bill's gone," someone muttered. "Nobody dives that low and comes back." But far below, life still clung to his wings. In a village along the Loire, people ran into the streets. They had seen the impossible, an American plane chasing a German under the bridge and coming out alone. For them, it wasn't just spectacle, it was deliverance. France was still occupied, and for one brief moment the occupiers looked mortal. A farmer named René Dubois later recalled, "We heard the engines first, one like thunder, the other screaming. Then we saw the American dive under the bridge. We thought he would die. Instead, the German burned." The story spread through the valley by nightfall, whispered in cafes and cellars. The Silver Ghost, they called it, the plane that flew through stone. Up above, Overstreet was trying to make it home. His fuel gauges flickered empty, but the Mustang still hummed. He throttled down, conserving every ounce of aviation spirit left in the tanks. His guns were silent, his radio broken, his oxygen nearly gone. He was alone, in every sense of the word. When he finally crossed the Allied lines, the ground controllers couldn't believe their eyes. Radar had written him off. They guided him toward a landing field outside Caen, the runway patched from bomb craters and lined with wreckage. He came in low, engine coughing, flaps barely responsive. The Mustang's tires kissed the dirt once, bounced, then rolled to a stop. The propeller spun down to silence. Mechanics ran to the plane and froze. The right wing was shredded. Bullet holes riddled the fuselage. The landing gear was half torn, yet the cockpit canopy opened slowly, and Overstreet climbed out, his flight suit soaked in sweat. "Where the hell did you come from?" an officer shouted. Overstreet pulled off his oxygen mask, his face streaked with oil and exhaustion. "From under a bridge," he said, dead serious. They laughed, thinking it was a joke. Until the French resistance confirmed it days later. Witnesses described the Mustang's markings, the dogfight, the explosion on the river. Everything matched. The squadron gave him a new nickname, the Ghost of Tours. It stuck. But Overstreet never bragged. When asked about it years later, he only said, "I didn't do anything special. I just didn't stop flying." It was the simplest way to describe the kind of courage that didn't seek glory, only survival. That day, in a sky full of fire, he proved that silence could be louder than radio calls, and that one pilot's will could drown out the noise of an entire war. 2 days after the bridge chase, Lieutenant William Overstreet sat in a canvas chair outside a field tent, his flight jacket draped over one shoulder. His Mustang, tail number 414, rested nearby under a tarpaulin, more holes than metal, more legend than machine. Mechanics walked around it in silence, shaking their heads. When the debrief began, the officers doubted every word. "You're telling us you chased a Messerschmitt under a bridge?" the intelligence captain asked, smirking. "Yes, sir." "And came out alive?" "Apparently." The tent went quiet. One of the maintenance sergeants handed over a fragment of German paint scraped from the Mustang's nose, proof of proximity so close it defied luck. Within a week, reports arrived from the French resistance confirming everything. The bridge, the German wreck, the eyewitnesses. The colonel who read them simply said, "So it's true. One man flew through hell, and hell blinked first." When the engineers inspected his plane, they found stress fractures spiderwebbing the wings and tail. The frame had endured G-forces beyond any design tolerance. The gun barrels were scorched from firing past their heat limits. The propeller blades were chipped, bent from flying too close to the river's surface. And yet, the engine still started. Overstreet refused any special ceremony. He asked for 2 things only: a new set of spark plugs and enough fuel to get back in the air. The story spread fast, first through the 357th Fighter Group, then across the entire 8th Air Force. The men who'd lost half their squadron that month needed something to believe in, and they found it in the Mustang that refused to die. They started calling him the Bridge Ghost. To them, he wasn't just a survivor. He was proof that the sky could still favor the brave. When reporters tried to interview him after the war, Overstreet turned them away. "Every pilot does something crazy eventually," he said. "I just happened to do mine where people were watching." Decades later, he would be honored by the French government for his actions. The citation read, "For valor and skill in the liberation of France, for defying the enemy and gravity alike." But he never displayed the medal. He kept it in a drawer beside a photograph of his squadron. Young faces frozen in black and white, most of them gone before 1945. Asked once what he thought of the P-51 Mustang, he smiled faintly. "She had teeth," he said. "But more important, she forgave mistakes." That forgiveness, that machine's resilience, was why he was still alive, and why his legend still flies every time a silver plane roars over a river bridge. When historians later studied the war in the air, they searched for logic, for patterns that could explain survival. But Overstreet's flight refused to fit the math. By every metric, he should have died. The numbers were clear. 1 man, 1 Mustang, 12 enemies, less than a minute of ammunition, near zero fuel. It wasn't strategy or technology that carried him through. It was something harder to measure: will. The engineers called his flight anomalous. The pilots called it courage. His duel beneath the bridge at Tours became one of the most famous dogfights of the war, not because it changed the front, but because it proved a point. Defiance has its own physics. The P-51 Mustang was more than aluminum and horsepower. It was the weaponization of belief that the impossible could be flown if you refused to look down. Overstreet's combat record listed 12 confirmed kills, but that single act made him immortal among pilots. It captured the essence of air war in 1944. Not precision, but survival through pure nerve. French civilians remembered the day forever. To them, the Mustang under the bridge was a symbol that the Allies were coming, that tyranny could still be outrun by bravery. To the Air Force, it was proof that the Mustang's design had achieved perfection in the hands of a man who trusted it completely. And to Overstreet, it was nothing more than another mission. "You don't think about dying," he said years later. "You think about flying." He lived long after the war, quiet and unassuming, never calling himself a hero. But in museums and training schools, his story became mandatory reading, not for tactics, but for spirit. Because sometimes, the war isn't won by formations or strategy. It's won by one man who refuses to stop pulling the trigger, even when the world says it's over. In the end, the bridge at Tours still stands, silent stone over quiet water. But somewhere in the echoes of that place, you can almost hear the roar of a Merlin engine, the ghost of a Mustang that refused to bow to gravity or fear. William Overstreet Jr. lived to old age, never chasing fame, never asking for applause. He once said, "I didn't fly for glory. I flew because running wasn't in my nature." That sentence defines an entire generation, the ones who learned that courage isn't loud and victory isn't always planned. Sometimes it's just a heartbeat, a pull of the stick, and a refusal to quit. The day he flew under that bridge, he wasn't breaking rules, but he was rewriting them.